Welcome back into the Blake and Jake show on KCOU 88.1 FM. And this is our very last segment of the day, so I'll go ahead and introduce it to you. It's UFC Fight Night, Moreno versus Royval 2. This is an exciting rematch after injuries plagued both the main event and the People's main event in their very first matchups. These are both rematches, and both are fireworks. Both of these needed to be remade because both of these fights are special. Now, we're going to go ahead and start with one fight that is maybe not in that main event, not even in the main card, but it catches my eye, and I think it sets the tone for the night, the UFC Fight Night. I think it sets the tone here, and it's Claudio Puelles versus Fares Ziam. Now, this shadows a bit of the People's main event when we see Yair Rodriguez versus Ortega later on in style. Claudio Puelles is world-class jiu-jitsu with, so many rolls and funky looks that Fares Ziam, who is a kickboxer, might just struggle tonight. Has struggled to defend submissions early in his career, but his last submission came to Terrence McKinney, who I feel is more of a pressure fighter. It wasn't a let me get you down on the ground and show you I'm better in every position. It was like, I'm going to hit you real hard, then I'm going to take you down real fast, and I'm going to be all over you. So I don't feel like this is exactly that same matchup as Terrence McKinney, which means Fares Ziam has not actually been submitted inside the UFC other than that by kind of a fighter that'll get down and beat him position by position. That's why I think Ziam has a little bit of a chance here. I expect Ziam to dominate on the feet and be smart enough not to follow Puelles to the floor. However, Puelles has put together long win streaks because he forces these opponents to the floor with them, or he forces like kickboxers like Ziam to kind of fight timid. I think this best win would be Ziam's when he fought Jamie Mullarkey, and even in his last matchup winning against Jai Herbert. Both of those offered very interesting matchups. Now, Mullarkey is just a hard hitter, scrapper. You're going to get in there, you're going to take some hits. But Jai Herbert is extremely long, offers a unique fight to anybody that he's in there with. And Ziam was able to prove that he could kind of get in and have success. I think that Ziam is smart enough here to get the win because Claudio Puelles is going to have to get this fight to the floor. If it goes to the floor, though, it's just going to be well said that Ziam is not on the level of Puelles, and Puelles will put on a masterclass. So both have something to watch out for there. Jake, do you have any opinions on that fight? If you could pick a fighter to win that fight, which one do you think wins it?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Ziam. As long as he can, like you said, stay off the floor, because Puelles is a much better grappler. Ziam has higher strikes landed, like, per minute. So I think if he can keep it up and off the floor, then he's got a pretty good chance.
You definitely have a point there. And I think that is like the fight to set off this entire card. When we break down the next fight, it's going to be Raul Rosas Jr. versus Ricky Tercios. Now, one of the themes of this fight night is clearly jiu-jitsu, because Raul Rosas Jr. is the youngest UFC fighter. In fact, he fought on the Dana White Contender Series before he was 18. He's a jiu-jitsu, once again, world class. And he's fighting Ricky Tercios, who's a special guy as well. Ricky Tercios is full throttle, has like a fantastic gas tank, and shows durability in spades. He doesn't always fight with a grounded stance. That's what I see when I watch him fight. I don't think he's a exceptional, powerful fighter for the bantamweight division, but I think it would benefit him a lot to kind of ground his strikes a little bit more, and I think that's why this matchup was made. I don't think the UFC wants Raul Rosas to lose. I think this is a fight set up for him to win. He's a young jiu-jitsu phenom. He won the Contender Series. He's now 3-1 already in just his first year. He's 19 now, but I mean, think about that. And he was 18 years old. He went to the top fighting organization, and he went 3-1 in just his first year. Spectacular. I think that this is kind of built for Rosas to continue building that hype train. Ricky Tercios is not going to give Rosas a free position, but I don't feel like Ricky Tercios has the power to put Rosas out, and I don't feel like he's going to be able to choke Rosas out or get an armbar. I don't think there's a submission in this fight for Ricky Tercios. So I think the question is, how does Ricky Tercios win?
I think he has the ability to win by knockout. Honestly, he's like you said, he's obviously young, but he is raw talent. I really do. I think that with the power that he has, at least in this fight, he has the opportunity to knock it out, and it also gets me excited for his future. If he can be able to build up that strength, he'll be a fantastic fighter in the future.
Certainly. But when I look at Ricky Tercios, I see really only one avenue of success in this fight. I don't think it belongs on the floor. It does belong on the feet, but I believe it belongs on the feet in the second and the third round. I think that's when Ricky Tercios can keep that gas pedal, keep it down, and maybe start to tire out Rosas a little bit. If Rosas is unsuccessful in that first round, maybe a little bit in that second round, is still not finding the success that he wants, I think that Ricky Tercios might just start to, see some avenues of victory in late into that second round and into that third round as well. That moves us into our third fight, and this is a fun one as well. This one is Daniel Zellhuber, I always mess that up, versus Francisco Prado is the fight. But Zellhuber is, if you don't know, now you know. And I know that's like a popular Dana White thing, but he's probably one of those top young prospects that just doesn't get enough buzz. He's huge. 6'1", 77-inch reach. I mean, Francisco Prado, who's a very special talent in his own right, is 5'10" with a 69-inch reach. Now, this is in the lightweight division. 77-inch reach in the lightweight division. It's absolutely insane. It gives Zellhuber such an advantage in these fights where he succeeds already the most. When he's striking, it's dangerous. His hands come around like whips, and a lot of these fighters just don't seem to get a good timing and a good space on Daniel Zellhuber. And I think this could be a pretty rough fight for Prado. What are your thoughts on this off the gate?
Yeah, I like you mentioned, he has tons great hand speed. I feel like that Zellhuber likes to work at a distance, probably because of that length. And he's able to keep opponents away from him in that regard. But I think that Prado is gonna probably try to pressure Zellhuber against the fence, maybe make him work to get a little bit closer. But overall, I have Zellhuber winning, and I think this fight will probably go the distance. But I think that if Zellhuber is able to take control of this fight early, then it'll be a good one for him.
On the feet is where Zellhuber does his work, having weapons from both stances. He really likes to switch those stances and throw everything. He's not a slouch on the floor either, submitting Christian Giagos in his last fight. But Prado is an absolute stud, and has proved, though, on the outside of the UFC and on the inside. He actually was Samurai House belt. He won the belt, and then he defended it 3 times heading into the UFC. Had a really tough debut versus Jamie Mullarkey, who we talked about earlier. Fares Ziam fighting and winning against Jamie Mullarkey, but just a tough fight for anybody, let alone a debut in the UFC. Then another tough ass. He's asked to fight Otman Azaitar in his sophomore performance, and I expected that to be another rough test for Prado, and I didn't expect him to figure it out so soon, but just in one round was able to get it done. In this fight, this is going to be just I see this as a decision, because both of these guys on the feet are spectacular, and I don't think either of them are going to get ahead on the ground either. I feel like Prado might have an advantage on the ground a little bit, but when you talk about Zellhuber's length, he's going to be able to negate a lot, going to be able to stuff a lot of takedowns. I don't know if that's Prado's best chance of winning in this fight. So when I look at it too, I see Zellhuber winning, but I do think Prado has some possibilities for some holes, some openings on the feet, especially when Zellhuber switches stances. Can he get a shot in during a stance switch? That's what this fight's going to be about. It's going to be about footwork, it's going to be about spacing, and it's going to be about Prado getting inside and ruining both of those for Zellhuber. All right, and now to the people's main event, and I'll be excited. This is one I've had circled on the calendar because it's name value, it's talent on every level, and it's just going to be an absolute chaos fight. It's Zaire Rodriguez versus Brian Ortega. This echoes the match between Puelles and Ziam that we discussed earlier. Brian Ortega has few equals in the UFC featherweight division when it comes to jiu-jitsu. Yet, I don't think his hand speed is very good, and his technical skills on the feet can definitely be taken advantage of. And when you look over Yair Rodriguez, a scary fighter, especially if you don't think that your stand-up game can compare, because Yair Rodriguez is throwing kicks from everywhere. There is no fighter that is going to feel comfortable in front of Yair. And that goes doubly so for Brian Ortega. I see this as a rough fight. I don't know. How do you see this fight, Jake?
Yeah, I feel like Rodriguez has a good amount of momentum coming into this fight. He has an unorthodox strike, lots of athleticism. Ortega, on the other hand, hungry for redemption against Rodriguez after getting controversially knocked out a while ago. I do have a question for you, though. Ortega hasn't fought since 2022. When they had their last fight, what kind of fighter do you think we're going to get from Ortega? You think he's coming out of the gate strong, or what do you think is going to happen?
I see Ortega as a very motivated human. Now, I want to just preface this. That last loss versus Yair Rodriguez was due to a dislocated shoulder. He was attempting to fight with it. It was just not going to work for a 5-round fight. And, so this is a very necessary rematch, number one. Number two, Ortega has been through a lot. I know that he was dating Vanessa Cortez, who is also a UFC fighter right now on a streak herself. They broke up. It's been a rough time for Ortega. But like I said, I think that Ortega is a very motivated human. I think he's pointed, as long as he's pointed in the right direction, I think you're going to get a good Brian Ortega in this matchup. I just don't think the style fits Ortega's matchup. I don't think this is a good matchup for Ortega, just looking at what Yair Rodriguez, offers other fighters as far as dangers. Yair Rodriguez is likely going to find a lot of success in the stand-up, keeping Ortega uncomfortable and on the outside with like a bunch of kicks and combinations. I expect Rodriguez to avoid the ground game of Ortega entirely. If Ortega does get Rodriguez to the ground, I still don't feel like the gap between the two is as cavernous as Yair is on the feet. I do feel like Rodriguez is much better than Ortega on the feet than Ortega is with Rodriguez on the ground. So I do think that Yair comes out of that matchup, and that brings us into the main event. And I got to tell you, this is a special main event for me because Brandon Moreno is possibly one of my favorite fighters. But if there is a guy that you've ever wanted to kind of get over the hump, it's Brandon Royval, and it is the matchup of the Brandons. And it is also matchup number 2. And in this matchup, Royval was the one with the injury. Early in the matchup, it was just clear Royval was not going to continue. So this matchup was just as needed in order to settle who is the better fighter here. And it comes at a pretty good time when both are coming off a loss to Alexander Pantoja. I see Brandon Royval being the aggressor in this matchup. The last fight, it ended on the ground scramble, dislocates the shoulder. But Royval, he's had plenty of time to grow and watch and everything. I feel like this fight is going to see the best version of both of these fighters. Brandon Moreno fights with fewer mistakes and more patience. But both, like I said, both are coming off that loss. Maybe it's time for one of them to switch it up. Do you think one comes out with a different style to win this matchup, Jake? Or do you think that this is just going to be, hey, stick to your guns and see who comes out at top?
No, I think this is definitely a stick to your guns type of thing. They had that other their previous matchup. You mentioned the injury. I think they want to do what they do best. I don't think they want to do something new. I think they're staying with what they know best.
Yeah, I struggle to pick in this matchup because I do think that Moreno's going to offer less holes than Brandon Royval in this fight. And Moreno's a sizable betting favorite in this matchup. It's getting pretty close to minus 300. I don't see that, though. Can I be honest? And this is a tough fight for me to decide as a fan because Brandon Moreno is a fan favorite of mine. But if I saw this fight 10 times, I would expect both to win 5. That's how close I see this. So when I saw that there was a minus 300 line on Brandon Moreno, it did catch me a little off guard. That does it for the 6th episode of The Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM. I invite listeners to be our very first followers on our newly created Instagram. That's The Blake and Jake Show, no spaces. If you've only caught part of the show, but not the whole show, or maybe you want to hear the whole show over again, check us out on Spotify and YouTube at The Blake and Jake Show. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we hope to see you next week for another episode of The Blake and Jake Show, Wednesdays at 2 p.m. on KCOU 88.1 FM. Thank you so much for listening.